The Monster by KJ Kelter. If the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Jesus of Nazareth, John 15:18-19, Chapter 1. Saint Siena, Italy, 1967. Why am I always chasing love? Angel Martin thought to herself as she rode in the back seat of her parents' luxury car. She could not get Sedgwick out of her mind, or the thought of his well-defined jaw laced with perfectly straight teeth. She liked to call him Seddy out of her ill-advised affections for him. But alas, the feelings were not shared by the so-named boy. The Martin family, originally of Baltimore, had moved to Saint Siena, a sleepy Italian town nestled between two small mountains of equitable height. Angel's father, Mr. Martin, was to assist the American ambassador in Rome. Their car's driver, whom the government appointed, drove casually while listening to the music softly playing on the radio. "Can you pass me the juice beside you, Pumpkin?" Angel's mother asked, Angel opening a small cooler of ice next to her and giving a bottle to her mother. "Don't call me that. Only Father can call me that." Angel, who appeared to be not a day over 20, complained. She wore a white hat with a red ribbon, jet black curly hair and green eyes complementing the girl's well-built body. "Don't be rude, darling. There is no need for it." Her mother, a tall woman with curly brown hair, nudged her husband in the ribs. "Tell her husband." Mr. Martin, busy reading a week-old copy of the New York Times, looked at his daughter. "Mother knows the rule. It must have slipped her mind." Mr. Martin let a small smile escape his face as he returned to reading. Angel gave her mother one of those looks and rolled down the car window. "I hate this heat. I hate this country. And I hate my life." "Don't pout, dear. You'll find another boy soon enough. We will introduce you to one of the neighbors' boys. These Italians are known for producing tall, dark, and handsome men. We are lucky to be moving to Saint Siena. It is considered one of the cutest towns in all of Italy," Mrs. Martin said, sipping juice from a cold glass bottle. "I don't want a new boyfriend. I want Seddy." "Sedgwick. What a horrid name for a boy. He only wants your bosom, dear. He is a known womanizer. The O'Brien girl's mother said he took her daughter's sanctity and never spoke to her again. He'll be a lifelong bachelor. Mark my words." "This is coming from a former burlesque dancer," Mr. Martin joked, Angel looking at her mother. "You danced burlesque? With Nana's money, why would you need to dance?" Angel asked, giggling. Mrs. Martin rested the cold bottle on her neck, ignoring the question. "You will go to school, become a nurse, and marry a decent man. I don't want to hear any more about it." Mrs. Martin lit a cigarette, her hands shaking from worn nerves, blowing out a lungful of smoke. "There it is," Mrs. Martin announced. A small castle crept towards the car. Its red clay bricks towered over the countryside. Mr. Martin gave 2 moments' attention, lowering his paper to look at the lodging provided to him by the Italian government. Even Angel, still thinking about Seddy's great smile and fast words, could not help but stare. The car pulled onto a paved road, making its way into the estate. People working the grounds waved as the car passed by. The Martins waved back, Angel being the only veto. "I heard someone call it D'Amato Castle. It was owned by a mistress of Benito Mussolini, or at least that's what they told me," Mr. Martin said. The car's driver jerked the wheel slightly. The driver piped up, "So sorry. Name D'Amato bring bad memories. It's called Pious Castle now." A rush of fantasy took over Angel's mind. Hidden artifacts and secret tunnels leading to treasures wrestled Seddy from her mind. "Are we there yet?" "Fond of your new home, are we?" Mr. Martin said. The sun was setting over the estate, and it was beautiful. One could easily envision Roman soldiers or an early Renaissance painter looking over the same landscape. The Martins exited the car and gazed at the structure they would call home for the foreseeable future. An Italian shepherd appeared out of nowhere, rushing to Angel, begging for affection. "Aw, can we keep her?" "Now, darling, I am sure she belongs to someone," her mother said. "Maria! Maria!" A thick, accented voice yelled. Its owner, Mrs. Benusi, grabbed the animal by its collar. She was a short woman with silver hair. Mr. Benusi, her husband, arrived shortly after with sweat pouring from his face. "Welcome, welcome," he said, catching his breath. He was not much taller, though a bit stockier than his wife. "Sorry about our dog. She is only a puppy," Mrs. Benusi said. "It's no problem, really. I love animals." Angel played with the dog. Mrs. Martin lowered her sunglasses and looked around. "Who are you people?" she asked rudely. "I am the groundskeeper of Dama. I mean Pious Castle and Villa," Mr. Benusi said, catching himself. "And you are?" Mrs. Martin asked, looking at the woman. "Scusi, this is my wife." "It's nice to meet you. The luggage is in the trunk. Tell the servants to be careful with the vases. They are worth more than everything you collectively own." The Benusis hesitated for a moment. "Why are you doing nothing?" Mrs. Martin lowered her sunglasses. "The servants don't live here. They are not expected for days," Mrs. Benusi informed her. Mr. Martin wandered over to a bed of roses, Angel riding his heels. "Look at the roses. Aren't they beautiful?" Mrs. Martin stood her ground with disbelief as Mr. Benusi began unloading the truck. "You don't expect us to cook for ourselves, do you?" Mrs. Martin laughed weakly. Angel buried her nose into a bed of roses and inhaled deeply. "This place is amazing." Angel jumped on her father and planted a small kiss on him. "Easy does it, darling. These knees don't pop like they used to." "I won't let go till you say it. Angel, don't play with me." "I'm serious. I have been going to the gymnasium lately, and these arms can hold on. Tight." Watching Angel and Mr. Martin interact, you would never suspect they were not biologically related. Angel was the only child of Mrs. Martin's previous marriage. Her biological father was some asshole named Jimmy, a used car dealer from home in the States. I wish Mother would stop expecting everyone to do everything for her. It comes from her mother. Queen Rebecca is what we called her before you were born, a woman who expected so much but herself held no value. "Don't talk bad about Nana." Mr. Martin hugged Angel tightly. "I love you, Pumpkin." "See, Daddy, it's not hard." Mrs. Martin struggled to get the bags from the car, one suitcase being jammed in the wrong way. "Can you help me with some of these bags, honey?" "Take a look around, Angel. Tell me what you find." Mr. Martin winked. Angel explored what the remaining sunlight allowed outside of the castle. Abandoned wells and farm equipment were some of the highlights. Impending darkness drove her inside, torches illuminating parts of the property. Angel searched every wooden floorboard for weakness. A hidden stash could be underneath. She searched the back of every oil painting. A secret passage to objects from a different world could be behind them. After hours and hours of searching, she could find nothing but empty cigar boxes and old wine bottles. She found herself lost in a myriad of long hallways. Every turn around a semi-familiar corridor led her to a completely foreign room. Her heart began to beat faster. Her pace quickened. She found the hallway getting colder and colder, standing in a room with a large pile of debris, chairs, tables, and other furniture stacked against a large tarp. The tarp covered a large section of a wall. Small holes covered the room. They appeared to come from the other side, immediately igniting her interest. Angel tied her hair back and began moving the domestic objects out of the way. Piece by piece, she made progress. 1 hour of exercise a day keeps the doctors away, she kept repeating to herself. It was something her grandmother, Nana Rebecca, had taught her. After about half an hour of hard work, the debris was gone, and she took a minute or two to catch her breath. She grabbed the tarp and pulled it as hard as she could. Dust filled the room as it came crashing to the floor. Angel coughed, trying to clear her throat. When the dust settled, she could see a large door. A harp was carved into the center panel with golden paint inside its creases. The entrance was sealed with large wooden boards. Before Angel could do anything else, someone entered the room behind her. "What are you doing?" Mr. Benusi yelled. She turned sharply, finding it hard to collect her thoughts. "I was just looking around." Mr. Benusi grabbed Angel by the arm. "You can never go inside this room. Do you understand me, child?" "I understand you're hurting my arm. Do you understand?" Angel ripped her arm back to her body, running from the room in complete fright. Mr. Benusi looked at the harp on the door, holding his hand over his mouth as a look of sorrow filled his eyes. She ran as fast as she could, tears falling from her eyes, mucus dripping from her nose. She turned a corner and screamed at a giant beast preparing to attack her. A bear stood on its hind legs, its paws lined with dinner plate-sized claws towering over her, the look of death in its eyes. After seconds of terror, she realized the beast was a stuffed ornament, a creature killed long ago, never to harm anything ever again. Its hunter probably long dead as well, Angel thought to herself. Suddenly, the faint sound of music enchanted her ears. Am I hearing things? She thought. As fast as it appeared, it was gone. Angel, where are you? Mrs. Martin yelled, carrying a torch. I'm over here, Mother. Mrs. Martin grabbed Angel and searched her over and over. What is it? Are you hurt? I heard you scream. I'm fine, Mother. I was frightened by a stuffed ornament. Did you hear the music a moment ago? She asked. Her mother made a strange face. Are you feeling all right? Mrs. Martin placed the back of her hand on Angel's forehead. You don't feel hot. I'm not hearing things. I heard someone play music. If you're not feeling well, you can skip your singing lessons tonight. Mother, I am fine. Trust me. If I skip my lessons for one night, it will throw my entire week off. You had better wash for supper. I'll draw a bath. Later that hour, Angel found herself stepping into a Victorian-style bathtub. The water was just barely too hot, causing Angel to stir it with her foot. She stepped in and placed her head on the back of the tub, where a folded towel lay. She sank into a state of relaxation as the hot water and sweet aromas of perfume soaked into her body. Maybe I was hearing things. Angel closed her eyes and drifted into darkness. Angel awoke to the faint sound of music. How long have I been asleep? She thought to herself. Angel looked at her hands. They were not waterlogged, indicating she had not been out long. That music, who's playing it? She wondered, ripping a towel off a shower ring and getting out of the bathtub. After dressing herself, she took an oil lantern from the house and decided to investigate. A harvest moon made the foggy night even eerier. Creaky sounds jumped out at her from every direction. Who's there? She yelled at one, thinking it was a person. She arrived at a hill overlooking the town of St. Sienna. She could see moonlight dancing off the water in the bay. Fog descended a mountaintop. It looked as if heaven itself was falling upon the ocean. She was overwhelmed by the romantic nature of what she was seeing. The music was now audible, and it was magnificent. A harp played Mozart's Greensleeves. People opened their windows to listen to the melody emanating from speakers across town. They looked to be from the Second World War period. Where was the music coming from? She thought to herself. Her eyes glazed over. A tightness formed at the pit of her stomach. She had fallen in love with the person playing the harp. The music stopped as swiftly as it had started, the sound of wailing ensuing, an awful, dreadful sound. She wondered if the creator of the music was also the origin of the wailing. Angel's eyes returned to normal as she awoke from the trance-like state. Oh, goodness. Angel ran back in the direction of Pia's castle and her parents. When Angel entered the castle, her mother verbally assaulted her. Where have you been? What were you thinking? You're losing your allowance. Angel tried to explain, but it was no use. Mrs. Martin was on a blitz of her entire world. She slapped Angel, driving her into a corner. Why do you have to cause me so many problems? Angel tried to shield her face, but her mother had her right hand pinned. The devil possessed her. A strong masculine hand grabbed Mrs. Martin's wrist out of nowhere. Mr. Martin stood with an angry expression on his face. I was disciplining my daughter. She belongs to me. I know what's best for her, Mrs. Martin hissed. Meet us at the dinner table, Mr. Martin said to Angel. She hesitated, caught between her mother and father. Now! Mr. Martin's hand still holding Mrs. Martin's. Angel left the room, wiping tears from her eyes and struggling to catch her breath. She had never seen her father so angry. Angel sat at the dinner table, sobbing as she regained her composure. Mrs. Martin entered the dining room staring at the floor. She took the seat next to Angel. Mr. Martin followed not a second after. I believe you have something to say? Mr. Martin coughed. I am so sorry, Angel. Can you ever forgive me? Angel tossed her head into her mother's arms. I love you, Mama, she said, almost whispering. Mrs. Martin caressed Angel's face and kissed her head. I will never hit you again. I promise. Angel looked at Mr. Martin, who winked in response. He took out a napkin and placed it inside his shirt. The mood in the room changed dramatically, from tears and apologies to laughter and reminiscence within only a few minutes. Remember when I overcooked the turkey and we had to go to the Chinese restaurant for Christmas? Mrs. Martin laughed. I still believe they served us dog meat that night, she joked. Angel and her parents laughed loudly. Darlings, I believe it's time for bed, Mrs. Martin announced. Daddy hasn't read to me yet? You're 20 years old, Angel. Don't you think you are getting a little old for such things? We are going shopping in town tomorrow. You will need your rest, Mrs. Martin said. Daddy has been reading to me every night he could since I can remember. I am not going to stop now. Besides, we are in the middle of the best part of the Count of Monte Cristo. You've read the book 100 times, Mrs. Martin chuckled. There is no harm in 15 minutes of reading, is there? Mr. Martin interrupted. Get ready for bed, and I'll read to you. Mrs. Martin took out a knitting kit and continued working on a white cotton sweater she had been knitting, her hands trembling. Angel kissed Mr. Martin on the cheek and rushed upstairs to her room. Mrs. Martin gave her husband an agitated look. You spoil our child. Someone has to, he said, turning to leave. Angel lay in her nightgown with the Count of Monte Cristo opened in front of her. She searched through the night table next to her bed. At the bottom, a framed photograph came to light. Dust obscured most of it, so she took a cloth and wiped it. It was clear this photo captured the essence of a wedding, though there was no telling how old it was. There must have been 50 people in the picture, the bride and groom standing at the center and the other people in rows behind them. The photograph looked to be decades old, judging by their clothing. Angel wondered who the married people were, or if they were still married or even alive. One child, in particular, caught Angel's attention. He was no more than 2 years old. He wore a very fancy outfit and was being carried by what looked to be his mother. Her face was not visible in the photograph. It was too out of focus. The two stood by themselves. Angel opened the back of the picture and examined it. All love is love was written in big erratic letters. A gilded harp stamp was in the bottom left corner, the same symbol imprinted on the door Angel had not opened. Mr. Martin entered the room, causing her to drop the photograph. What are you doing, Angel? He examined the picture. It's an old wedding photograph, Angel explained. He looked half-heartedly at the faded image. I talked to your mother. After you go shopping tomorrow, you're going to see a doctor. I am not crazy. Mom should be the one going to a doctor. Angel crossed her arms. What do you expect me to do? You hear music no one else hears, and you've got your mother all upset. Why don't you ever listen to me? I am not a child. Mr. Martin sat on the bed and began rubbing Angel's back. She rolled over and looked at him. I found something today. And what might that be? I found a door. I don't know what is behind it exactly. A bunch of garbage blocked it. The symbol of a harp was on it. I had just finished moving the debris when Mr. Benusi caught me. He yelled at me and told me never to go inside. The back of this also has a harp on it, she said, just as he spotted the symbol. He noticed her assertion to be true after looking over the photograph. I am sure he has his reasons, darling. You know how these old Italians can be. He probably keeps the bodies of young American girls he killed inside the room, Mr. Martin joked. Angel slapped her father lightly on the arm. Don't scare me. Mr. Martin read the story until Angel had fallen asleep. He pulled the covers over and kissed her before blowing out the lantern, gently closing the door behind him. When Angel awoke, Mr. Martin had already left as he supposedly had to attend an important meeting in Rome. She took a bath, brushed her teeth, and got dressed for the day. Your breakfast is getting cold, Mrs. Martin yelled. I'm coming, Angel called back as she browsed through bottles of perfume she had found in the bathroom. One of them caused her to flinch at its aromatic scent. She picked one of medium strength and sprayed herself twice.
End of chapter 1.